Believe, the biggest threat to memory after 60 is often hiding in plain sight. Most people assume a few missing names or a slow thought are just inevitable aging. But that is not always what is happening. Sometimes the brain is simply not getting the specific nutrients it needs to keep connections sharp. And once you see that hidden mechanism, the whole idea of normal forgetfulness starts to look very different. Stay with me, because by the end, this will change how you think about focus, clarity, and what your brain may have been missing for years.
After 60, many people begin to notice a change that is hard to ignore. A name slips away. A word sits right on the tip of the tongue and never comes. Someone walks into a room and for a second, it feels like the thoughts stayed behind. It is not always serious, but it happens often enough to cause concern. And then a quiet question appears, one that almost nobody answers properly. Is this just aging, or is the brain asking for help? The truth is that not every slowdown in mental sharpness is part of an unavoidable fate. The brain does age, yes, but it also responds to what it receives every single day. And when the diet becomes poor in important nutrients, memory, focus, and mental clarity can feel it long before any bigger problem appears. It is not magic. It is not a single solution either, but it is very real. There is a huge difference between accepting that some changes come with age and assuming that nothing can be done. That difference begins with what lands on the plate. Because the brain does not work in a vacuum. It needs raw materials to produce signals, sustain connections, maintain energy, and protect its cells from wear and tear. When that foundation becomes weak, the mind starts to complain. First with small forgetfulness, then with mental tiredness, then with difficulty organizing the day. And that is where the most important part of this conversation begins. Some nutrients play a direct or indirect role in how we think, remember, and concentrate. There is no magical food. There is no capsule that can fix everything. But there is a very real combination of nutrients that helps the brain function with more stability. Understanding that changes the way aging is seen. There is also a common trap at this stage of life. A person starts eating less, simplifies the routine too much, avoids foods out of fear or habit, and without realizing it begins removing exactly what the body needs to keep going strong. The result does not always show up as a clear illness. Sometimes it appears as a kind of fog. The mind still works, but not with the same steadiness as before. Memory slips a little, thinking takes longer, focus breaks easily, and little by little, that affects confidence. One of the first things to understand is simple. The brain needs support to communicate. Every thought, every memory, and every decision depends on cells exchanging information all the time. For that, the brain needs to produce specific substances, keep its membranes healthy, and have enough energy to operate. When that system becomes fragile, the feeling is often the same one many people describe without being able to explain it properly. A heavy head, short attention, slower thinking. And no, that does not mean every lapse in memory comes from a nutrient deficiency. But it does mean it is worth looking more closely, because the problem is sometimes not age itself, but the kind of fuel the brain is receiving. Among the nutrients that deserve attention, one often goes unnoticed, yet it has an important relationship with memory and mental processing: choline. Many people have never paid attention to that name, but it helps produce a substance linked to communication between nerve cells. In simple terms, it helps the brain send and receive messages more efficiently. And that matters for remembering, focusing, and following a conversation without extra effort. Choline is found in foods like eggs, liver, some meats, fish, and also other foods in the diet, although not always in such high amounts. In older adults, paying attention to this nutrient makes sense, because the brain's functional needs remain, while intake can drop over time, whether because of a smaller appetite, a more repetitive diet, or an exaggerated fear of certain foods. And when choline is low, brain communication can lose quality. Not overnight, but gradually, in a way that many people call getting older, when there may actually be a nutritional gap underneath. That is the first important loop to close. Memory is not the only thing at stake. The very foundation of the brain's internal communication is also involved. And when that foundation improves, the response can show up in a very simple, almost subtle way. The person is still the same, but gets lost less often in the middle of tasks, remembers more easily, and feels less of that mental fatigue that even gets in the way of everyday conversations. And when memory seems to fail, many people rush to blame time. But in many cases, time is only exposing a weakened nutritional base. That does not make aging less important. It simply makes the conversation more precise. And precision matters because it prevents rushed conclusions and helps people make better decisions. After choline, there is another group of nutrients that deserves respect: the B vitamins, especially B12, folate, and B6. These vitamins are not just decorative nutrition. They take part in processes linked to brain metabolism, the formation of essential substances, and the functioning of the nervous system. When people talk about mental energy, many immediately think of coffee. But brain energy also depends on how the body transforms and uses the nutrients it receives. That helps explain why some people, even without realizing it, live in a constant state of mental tiredness. It is not only lack of sleep, it is not only stress. Sometimes there is a weak foundation of vitamins that support the nervous system. And in older adults, this deserves extra attention because absorption can decline, appetite can change, and some deficiencies go unnoticed for a long time. B12, for example, is especially important because deficiency can be linked to confusion, slowness, and difficulty concentrating. Folate supports essential processes in the body and also plays a role in brain health. B6 participates in reactions that help produce compounds important for the brain. When this group is out of balance, the mind may not switch off, but it loses agility. The person keeps functioning, just with more effort. And in daily life, that weighs heavily. Perhaps this is one of the most underestimated aspects of brain health after 60. Not every drop in focus is a dramatic warning sign. Sometimes it is the body asking for more basic support. That is why looking at diet, tests, and routine matters so much. Correcting a deficiency may not solve everything, but it can improve the ground on which memory happens. And here is a detail that many people understand better when they see the logic of the brain. It's not enough to talk about isolated vitamins, because the brain also needs structure. It needs the right kind of fat, and that is where omega-3 enters the conversation. For years, many people were taught to distrust all fat, but the brain is an organ that depends on specific lipids to keep its membranes functioning. Omega-3 is part of that structure. It helps support the integrity of nerve cells and is linked to the way they communicate. In other words, it's not a side detail. It's part of the environment where thinking happens. Food sources such as oily fish, seeds, and some nuts fit into this strategy, although absorption and use vary from person to person. The main point is this: the brain does not function well when it receives only empty calories. It needs quality. And omega-3 is a clear example of how one nutrient can influence the overall picture of cognition. There's also an important background here. Aging often comes with more inflammation and more cellular wear. That does not mean disease is automatic, but it does mean brain protection should be taken seriously. Omega-3 helps as part of that protection, supporting a balance in an environment that tends to become more vulnerable with age. And perhaps this is one of the biggest shifts in perspective in this video. Brain health is not only about training memory, it's also about protecting the tissue that does the thinking. When that idea lands, everything changes. The question is no longer just, how do I remember better? It becomes, what am I giving my brain so it can keep working well? At this point, it's worth making space for two nutrients that many people associate more with the body than the mind, yet they influence the brain in an indirect and important way: vitamin D and magnesium. They're not usually sold as memory nutrients as easily as other popular names, but that does not make their role any smaller. Vitamin D takes part in many functions in the body and is often discussed when it comes to bone health. But low levels can also affect mood, energy, and overall well-being.
What stands out to me is how often people blame the calendar when the body is really responding to a long stretch of quiet shortages. It doesn't feel dramatic at first. It feels like being a little less sharp, a little less steady, a little more tired to think, and that can be easy to dismiss for a while. If you've stayed with us this far, I'm guessing this kind of conversation matters to you. If that's true, consider subscribing, and if this has been helpful, leave a like. What I find encouraging is that the brain often gives us clues long before anything feels truly serious. Not in a loud way, just a slow change in how steady life feels from one day to the next. And that's why this conversation matters beyond memory or focus. It's really about protecting the part of us that keeps us present. If this way of thinking resonates, subscribe to stay with us, like the video if it helped, and tell me, which change do you think people overlook most often? Food, sleep, or just the assumption that this is age? If this subject stayed with you, the next discussion will likely speak to you too.
And when the body feels weaker, a mind often feels it too. In older adults, less sun exposure, changes in routine, and other conditions can increase the risk of insufficiency. This may not appear as one clear symptom, but as a combination of fatigue, apathy, and less mental vitality. Magnesium works in a similar way. It participates in countless reactions in the body and can influence neuromuscular balance, relaxation, and overall function. When intake is poor, a person does not always notice it right away, but the body becomes less stable, sleep may worsen, recovery can slow down, and mental clarity suffers indirectly. Sometimes the problem is not forgetting more, it is being more exhausted to think. That is an important point, because many people try to separate the brain from the rest of the body as if it worked on its own. It does not. If the diet is poor, if hydration is low, if sleep is chaotic, and if the body lives in a constant state of wear, the mind feels it. The brain may be the center of thought, but it depends on the whole body to function well. And when the body starts charging that price, the signs do not appear all at once. First comes the feeling that everything takes more effort, then small failures, then the insecurity of doing tasks that used to be automatic. That is how a nutritional detail can slowly become a real functional change. Now, there is an extra layer of protection that deserves attention because it is often forgotten: antioxidants from food. As the years go by, the body becomes more exposed to oxidative stress, which is a form of cellular wear. That does not mean panic. It means consistent care. Fruits, vegetables, and naturally colorful foods help provide protective compounds that take part in that defense. But here, one expectation needs to be adjusted. There is no miraculous antioxidant. What exists is a smarter eating pattern. A plate with variety, color, and real food usually offers far more protection than chasing a single product promoted as the answer. The brain does not benefit from tricks. It benefits from consistency. Maybe that's the most human part of all. After 60, what helps most is almost never the radical thing. It is the repeated thing, the simple thing that happens many times. It is a breakfast that is not poor, a lunch with protein and vegetables, a routine in which the body stops living on the edge. And that brings us to a nutrient that nobody usually puts in the spotlight when talking about memory, but that deserves attention for another reason: enough protein. Protein is not only for muscle, it provides amino acids that help build and maintain many functions in the body, including the nervous system. When the diet is low in protein, the person can lose strength, energy, and overall stability. And that general decline eventually reaches the mind. This is especially relevant because appetite can decrease, chewing can become harder, routine can shrink. The person eats less, and without realizing it, lowers the quality of what is eaten. The consequence does not show up only on the scale. It shows up in the energy to think, walk, talk, and keep independence. And here's a truth worth holding on to. Very often the feeling of a weak mind goes hand in hand with a body that is undernourished. That does not mean every mental difficulty comes from protein, but it does mean the mind needs a body that is at least adequately supported. When that improves, some very concrete rewards appear. More steadiness throughout the day, less fatigue when dealing with simple tasks, more stability for remembering appointments, more presence in conversations. There is another detail that helps explain why some people age with more clarity than others. It's not just luck, it's combination. Memory does not depend on one nutrient alone, but on a set of conditions that reinforce one another. When choline is present, when B vitamins are in order, when omega-3 is part of the routine, when protein is enough, and when the body is not stuck in a constant deficit, the brain works in better territory. Now let's come to the part that is often ignored when people talk about brain nutrients. it's not enough to add good things. It's also necessary to notice what is getting in the way, because some habits slowly wear down mental clarity without making a sound. Too many ultra-processed foods belong here. They can take the place of foods that genuinely nourish. Too much sugar also contributes to an unstable eating pattern, with energy highs and lows that tire the body and blur attention. Too little water makes everything worse in a way that is almost invisible. Many people think they are just tired, when in fact they are underhydrated. Alcohol, when frequent, also takes a toll. Poor sleep closes the loop. And if a person lives in isolation, with poor meals and little routine, the mind loses both stimulation and support at the same time. There is also a common problem: supplementing without a clear reason. Buying capsules because someone said they are good for you can become a trap, because it doesn't help to fix one detail while ignoring the whole picture. Sometimes a person invests in one product and keeps eating badly, sleeping badly, and drinking too little water. The improvement then does not come, or it comes far less than it could. That is why the view needs to be broader. The brain after 60 does not ask for an exotic solution. It asks for a foundation. It asks for regularity. It asks for the right nutrients in the right context. And when that starts to make sense, the person stops chasing promises and starts building a realistic routine. The real change at heart is moving out of the logic of alarm and into the logic of care. Instead of waiting for a bigger problem to act, the person begins noticing the small signals. Constant mental tiredness, repeated lapses, difficulty concentrating, loss of interest, slowness without a clear explanation. Those signs are not there to frighten anyone. They are there to guide. If I were to sum everything up in a practical map, it would look something like this. The brain needs raw materials to think well. It needs choline to support communication. It needs B vitamins for neurological metabolism. It needs omega-3 for structure and protection. It needs vitamin D and magnesium for overall balance. It needs antioxidants from real food. And it needs enough protein to keep the body and mind standing. It's not about choosing one item and forgetting the rest. It's about building a combination that works in favor of mental clarity. And of course, there are limits to all of this. If there is significant memory loss, frequent confusion, changes in behavior, or a rapid decline, that deserves professional evaluation. Nutrition helps a lot, but it's not a substitute for investigation. The goal here is not to promise the impossible. It's to avoid letting mild symptoms be ignored for too long, or accepting as normal something that may be improved. It's also worth remembering that every body responds differently. Some people improve most when they correct protein intake. Others feel a difference when B12 is addressed. Others notice the biggest impact when the entire diet is reorganized. That's why the most honest path is usually the best one. Observe, test with guidance, and adjust calmly. There's no safer shortcut than that. If you look at everything we've covered, you'll notice something important. The brain does not age on its own. It ages within a context. And that context can be helped or harmed by what goes onto the plate, by what is missing, by what is excessive, and by what is repeated every day. Maybe the biggest message is this: after 60, taking care of memory does not begin only with mental exercises. It also begins with nutrients that truly support brain function. Real food, variety, enough protein, good fats, well-chosen vitamins and minerals. Not as a trend, as a foundation. And that changes even the way we speak to our own bodies. Instead of asking only, why am I forgetting so much? It's worth asking, what is missing in my routine that could help my brain work better? That small shift in question may seem simple, but it opens a path that is more useful, more calm, and more intelligent. If any part of this conversation made sense to you, it may be worth looking at your routine with a little more care. What is missing from your plate? What is too much? What could be simpler, more consistent, more nourishing? Sometimes mental clarity does not begin with a big change. It begins with one better choice, repeated again tomorrow.
What stands out to me here is how often the mind is treated like it lives on its own. In real life, it rarely does. When the basic inputs get thinner, people don't always notice a dramatic change. Just a little more effort, a little less ease, a little more hesitation. That's usually how the body speaks before it ever shouts. If you've stayed with us this far, I'm guessing this kind of conversation is exactly your thing. So consider subscribing. And if this reflection helped, give the video a like. What I keep thinking about is that brain health after 60 is not really about chasing a perfect memory. It's about giving the brain enough support to stay steady in ordinary life. That's a quieter goal, but honestly, a more useful one. If this video gave you something practical to think about, I'd really appreciate it if you subscribed, liked it, and shared in the comments. Which small nutrition change do you think would make the biggest difference to your own mental clarity? And if this topic interested you, the next conversation will probably feel just as relevant.